Rogue One and Solo are two very different and yet very similar movies. On the one hand, they're different because of their stories and characters. Rogue One is an ensemble movie showing the rebellion prior to the opening of A New Hope. Solo, meanwhile, is a spin-off showing the adventures of Han Solo prior to the events of the original trilogy. They're also both really similar though, because they suck. Alright, I'm not making this video to be the upteenth YouTuber to shit on the Disney Star Wars movies. I actually wanted to make this video and revisit these two movies. Disney could have easily just made a brand new trilogy of Star Wars sequels, but they also went ahead and made spin-offs as well. So, I wanted to see if there was anything of note. Anything to make me believe they were worth the millions of dollars that were shoveled into them. Spoiler alert! No! Now I could just end the video there, but where's the fun in that? Plus, as harsh as I'm sounding, there are things I do actually like about these movies. Not much, but hey, I should be at least a little positive. Hell, if I gave the prequels a second chance and claimed they weren't entirely hopeless, then I should be fair and give these movies a chance and discuss the good and bad, rather than just say it was all bad. So, let's begin.
We stand here amidst my achievement, not yours!
Rogue One, more like no one, actually likes this movie. Rogue One is awful. I'm serious, this movie does not hold up all that well. I remember liking it a lot when I first watched it back in 2016. Of course, I also liked other 2016 hits when I first watched them, such as Batman v Superman, Suicide Squad, Doctor Strange, Finding Dory, Ghostbusters. I'm just kidding, I never liked Lady Ghostbusters. Or Damaged Forehead. My point is, taste changes, so even though I had a lot of fun watching Rogue One in theaters, I didn't have fun revisiting it years later. Now I was expecting to not enjoy it as much. I knew deep down I wasn't going to be as impressed with it as I was the first time. Still, I expected Rogue One to have at least some sort of fun in it. Maybe a fun action scene and cool visuals to gawk at, and we do get some of that in the third act. The rest of the movie is just so boring and so hard to care about. The reason being, Rogue One is not a real movie. It's a clusterfuck of references to better movies and Transformers tier action. There's no drama, no real character development, nothing. I know Scorsese likes to belittle Marvel's filmography for being amusement park rides, but seriously, Star Wars is way worse and way more like what he's describing. Marvel at least had to work hard to make you care about these characters the general public couldn't give two shits about a decade earlier. How many people really knew about Tony Stark and Steve Rogers in 2008? Compare that with the amount of people who knew who Darth Vader was at that time. Star Wars was in the general public's mind for years, so Disney just had to put everything on autopilot with these new movies, and it shows. So it's hard to talk about Rogue One as a standalone movie, because it really isn't. It's Star Wars' first attempt at a spin-off movie, if you don't count the Clone Wars movie. Which people don't. The story is basically a group of Randys have to steal the Death Star plans from the Empire. You know, that little blurb at the beginning of A New Hope about rebel spies? Yeah, that. So really, this movie is kinda over before it's even started. That's the trouble with prequels. We already know how the movie ends. But that's where the clever writing and effort are supposed to come in and trick you into liking these characters and caring about the story, even if you already know what's going to happen next. Put it into a different perspective. Why do studios still make historical dramas and biopics? Besides being blatantly obvious Oscar bait and emotionally manipulative cash grabs. It's because sometimes they make for interesting movies. Anyone could have looked up the Wikipedia article on the life of Frank Sheeran instead of seeing The Irishman. Anyone can learn about World War II and the Holocaust in school instead of watching Come and See and Schindler's List. But what they can't get out of being told information is seeing these people and events for themselves. The best stories are almost always about the journey rather than the outcome, and that's what a great movie does. Show, don't tell. We can almost always predict the end of these movies, but the content within them, if they do it right, sticks with us long after we've finished watching it. Same thing with prequels, to an extent. The ending is pretty much laid out, but it's the journey to the ending that's the important part. And sure, prequels are not on the same level as real-life historical events, but the idea still applies here. The importance of the journey, not the ending. Still, prequels are a lot harder to pull off than any other installment in a series, but it's not impossible. Just look at the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance. Here's proof that not only can a prequel work, some people might even say it's better than the original. Hell, even if it can't be better than the original or groundbreaking, then at least it has the opportunity to be unique in some way, separate from the original. I mean, give Monsters University credit, at least that movie's plot had no bearing on the original Monsters, Inc. It was its own story, and it just so happened to have the same characters as the first movie. So Rogue One is meant to show how the rebellion came into contact with the Death Star plans. That's the important part. So was it worth showing?
No!
This movie's goal was to enhance A New Hope and even fix some inconsistencies while they were at it, but honestly, it kinda made A New Hope worse. Whether or not prequels struggle to be good or bad, they will always be unnecessary. A good prequel will always be less important when compared to the original, but some prequels are so good that it doesn't matter whether it was necessary to watch or not. But when a prequel doesn't at least entertain, it only enhances the fact that they weren't important even more. Rogue One wasn't necessary and wasn't a very good movie. It devalues the importance of A New Hope and the adventures of Luke, Han, and Leia. They're no longer the reason the rebellion won the Battle of Yavin, they were only part of it. Actually, what's paradoxical is the fact that this movie shows off more characters important to the destruction of the Death Star and simultaneously less characters all at the same time. Rogue One introduces the true heroes of the day, the diverse group of bland characters whose names I can't remember who stormed the CGI beach planet to get the plans, but also reveals the one weakness of the Death Star was put there on purpose by one guy. Yeah, that hole in the Death Star that Luke uses the Force to help blow it up, put there on purpose so the rebels can easily destroy it. Gee whiz, this rebellion thing seems so much easier than the originals were making it out to be. What a bunch of fucking pussies. I'm not even kidding. This movie fixes the Death Star hole and everyone seems to be strangely okay with that. It's no longer, hey, the Empire is so sure of their technical marvel that they don't even think our little rebellion can take them on. But we found this little Achilles heel that will be the downfall of their greatest superweapon. Now it's, hey, this random dude who was building the Death Star put in this weakness because he's actually not that bad. Sure, he built the space Nazi superweapon, but he didn't want to. Wow, he's not such a bad guy after all. Hey, wasn't the Death Star designed by those bug creatures on Geonosis? Why weren't they the ones in charge of building the Death Star? Typical Hollywood whitewashing, making the white guy the secret hero to sacrifice his life for the greater cause. Shaking my goddamn head. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say this may be a worse retcon than midichlorians. It's just so stupid and delegitimizes A New Hope so hard. I guess I wouldn't be as mad if people were as mad about it as they are about other retcons in the bad Star Wars movies, but they aren't. Fine, whatever. Besides that, there really isn't anything spectacular about Rogue One. It's just so boring. Is there anything that I actually liked about it? Well, there was one thing, and it's probably everyone's favorite part too. Darth Vader. Surprisingly, Darth Vader was actually the best part of this movie. His scene with Krennic was pretty funny, and the last scene with him straight up murdering the nameless rebels, it was honestly really satisfying to watch. But that's it. Those two scenes were the only highlights for me. Yeah, the final space battle was cool, but again, that's the only one aspect. So the only good parts about this movie are only 1/100th of the whole thing? That's kinda sad. See why I don't trust Rotten Tomatoes? Oh shit, even Letterboxd is being too kind. I can't say I had fun revisiting this movie. In fact, it was way worse than I was anticipating. I hate to use the theme park ride analogy again, but it was like going on a roller coaster you liked as a kid, again as an adult, and realizing it's not as fun. Actually, scratch that. I am okay with using the theme park ride analogy. Because it's true. This is not cinema. Hell, it's not even a bad movie like the prequels, because it's just so boring. It's not even so bad it's good, just boring and unimpressive. 4 out of 10.
Like a star, you can't stop my shine. I'm loving clouds, hitting my head to the sky. I'm solo, I'm Han Solo, I'm Han Solo.
Despite Rogue One fucking up the canon arguably worse than the prequels, people seem to really like it. Seriously, I guess that Vader scene had such a positive effect on people that they forgot about the boring nothingness they just witnessed. $1 billion? Forget all that production trouble that rivaled Suicide Squad's production. This movie overcame all of that. Apparently. Well, considering the next Star Wars spin-off had just as much, if not more, obvious red flags with its production mishaps, then people must have really loved Solo just as much, right? Wrong! Solo was the first dud for Disney Star Wars. Of course, by dud, I mean it didn't make $1 billion. It still made more than its budget, just admittedly not as much as it probably could have. Hell, it didn't even do as well critically as Rogue One. So this movie must seriously suck, right? Wrong again! Well, kinda. Solo does have a lot of the same problems as Rogue One, and as well as the other Disney Star Wars movies. It's also not nearly as good as maybe it could have been. It's kind of the same situation Ant-Man was in. A really cool director, or in this case directors, were attached, but then left due to creative differences. Then a new, much safer director was brought on and made something inoffensive. Seriously, it's not like any of this is a secret. Disney is doing this in front of our fucking faces, and they're still doing it. I mean, I guess I'm one to talk. I paid to go see Ant-Man. But not Solo. Yep, I didn't even have have it in me to go see Solo in theaters. It wasn't until about half a year later, and after seeing countless reviews of it, did I finally see it for myself. On Netflix. On my laptop. At like 2 in the morning. And after watching it for myself, I've got to be honest, I expected worse. I may be in the minority here, but I'm serious when I say I don't think Solo is all that bad. I mean, it's not good, granted, but I didn't hate it as much as I did Rogue One. You may be asking, but why? What does Solo get more right than Rogue One? Well, not much, but enough. For starters, Han is an infinitely more interesting character than Jyn. She's not even the best character named Jyn in fiction. Even if it's a different actor than usual, it's still Han. In fact, that gets me to my next controversial take. I don't think Alden Ehrenreich does a bad job as Han. He may not get the voice down all too well, but he does kinda nail the mannerisms. He's snarky, but not to the point that he's annoying. There's several moments in this film where I could definitely see him as the younger version of Han. Hell, when Chewie shows up, their chemistry worked really well. I love seeing them interact together. That's another point I want to mention. Chewie being a main character. Seeing Chewbacca interact with people and actually having relevance to the plot of the movie was insane, but in a good way. The sequels just kind of toss him to the side and only acknowledge him when the new characters need him or for him to react to something. Here, he's actually integral to several heists throughout the film. People talk to Chewie as if he's an actual character. He ends up being one of the best characters in the movie. I'm really happy for Chewie. Can he get more respect in the other sequels? Please? Honestly, if the movie was just about Han and Chewie going on some wacky adventure, I'd be all for it. But it can't just be that simple, can it? Alright, so even though I really do like Han and Chewie in this movie, what is it I really don't like about it? Well... Han having a girlfriend in the movie acting like she's really important, even though we never hear anything about her in the rest of the franchise. Han's real name not being Solo. The villain being some generic Marvel tier forgettable douchebag. This band of resistance pirates. Lando. Yeah, not really a fan of Donald Glover's portrayal of Lando. It seems to just be Donald Glover being Donald Glover. Which is funny, I guess, but he can be a little annoying at times. But not quite as annoying as L3. Possibly one of the most annoying characters in all of Star Wars, up there with Jar Jar Binks, maybe even more so. But at least she's killed off after like 20 minutes. The Kessel Run being a giant tentacle monster in space clouds. The pinnacle of meh. Han shooting first. Yep, Han shoots Woody Harrelson before he can draw, cause get it? Han shooted first. Even though current versions of A New Hope still have Greedo shooting first, so this moment doesn't really line up well with the canon. What was the point of this? And quite possibly the most embarrassing use of nostalgia and fan service, Darth fucking Maul. I'm sure Disney was just so confident in this reveal that people would absolutely shit themselves when they saw him. Even though he's been brought back twice in 2 different TV shows, and since the general public isn't interested in those, they were mostly confused. Imagine being someone who hasn't paid any attention to anything Star Wars related that aren't the movies, and see the guy Obi-Wan sliced in half in Phantom Menace show up just fine. Also, gotta ignite that lightsaber because it wouldn't be a Star Wars movie without a fucking lightsaber! This reveal is lazy. You could just cut this entire scene out of the movie and nothing would be lost. And that's that. Solo, or 120 days of shit. I'm gonna be honest and say, yeah, this movie kinda sucked. It was unnecessary and didn't prove otherwise. The only reason I can't say it was entirely bad though is because it wasn't as boring. Sure, the fan service was equally as annoying and the retcons are debatable on whether they were worse than any of the other retcons, but that's only half of the movie. The other half is Han and Chewie joining this group of other smugglers and going on action-packed heist missions. And as far as cheesy heist movies go, I expected a lot worse. A lot of people would call this safe or at best fine, and I would agree, and say there's nothing wrong with safe as long as it still comes across as good. Which, again, is debatable in this case. I can't say this was the best Star Wars movie ever, but I can't say it was the worst either, so I'm giving it a pretty generous 5 out of 10. You want to know what really sucks about these spin-off movies? The fact that they could have been so much better than the sequel trilogy. Really think about it. These movies have the opportunity to be much more than the mainline Star Wars movies. They could have experimented with storytelling and character drama and what it means to be a Star Wars movie. Instead, they end up being the most generic and boring blockbusters to ever grace the silver screen. Seriously, they make the MCU movies seem like Scorsese films. But I guess if I had to choose which one I would prefer watching again, I would have to go with Solo. Maybe you found that surprising, so let me explain. Solo is not a good movie. It's not even the best movie out of the Disney Star Warses. It too is just as boring and uninteresting as the other movies. But, and this is important, I don't entirely hate it. Sure, the part where it's revealed that Solo isn't even his real name really annoyed the hell out of me, but that's a minor annoyance as opposed to straight up changing the lore of the story. That's all Solo is, a minor annoyance. However, don't think because I'm saying Solo isn't all that bad, that means that I'm defending it. I'm not. Solo is average, but fun. Some of the time. Rogue One is a boring mess of fanfiction that blows my mind with how much people will defend it. Maybe you like these movies, maybe you don't. The point I'm trying to make is, not even the spin-off Disney Star Wars movies were worth watching, in my opinion. So imagine my distaste for the actual sequels of the original movies, and imagine my anger and how it wasn't always like this. That's right, viewers. I wasn't always a sequel hater. I was actually quite the opposite.
To